Wonderful to join you and share about charisma for 1.5 hours. We're going to talk about charisma and how it relates to relationships. I thank Frank for putting this on so that we can share our concepts with the Russian Federation community. Our format is going to be 2 rooms. One is English and one is Russian, and our translator today is Alexander. Most of the time, we'll be doing simultaneous translation. On some occasions, I will pause if the concept is major and make sure it makes sense. I live in the United States. I'm talking to you from just outside of Portland, Oregon. We're famous for several things: Nike and the just near where Starbucks and Seattle, Washington is. Now, I think it's amazing. And when I look at my crystal ball of what the future holds, communication has changed a lot. At one time, we communicated through the use of the typewriter. But what they did was eventually they made the typewriter mobile. The way they did that, though, they actually folded the typewriter so it came down like this. It actually could fit in the saddlebag of a horse. And when they would drive right along, if they had some information they had to type up, they would take this and they would flip it up and they could type. So we are changing a lot how we communicate. I think it's absolutely fantastic that we can talk to each other through a translator and have it make sense. We've always shared with each other. Example, in the United States, there's a famous person who calls himself the horse whisperer. It is a way to use influence instead of power to train a horse. In actual fact, that was perfected by the Russians. Somewhere at least by 1910, they had perfected it. Now, how does that topic relate to what we're going to be talking about today? It relates because our topic is charisma. Now, what is charisma? It is a balance between knowing when to use power and when to use influence. If you use power all the time, you wear people out. You're operating from authority. That's not effective. If you operate just from influence, you may have great relationships, but you are not getting a lot done. So people with power, they tend to have high expectations of people. And people that have high relationships, they have high morale with other people. Charisma is when you have both and you know when to use them. So just like the horse trainers of Russia, we try not to overpower the horse or people. We try to act in such a way so that the horse wants to please us. And so, if I may, the Russian community, at least equestrians, horse riders, they've understood this for many, many years. Now, today, our concepts are coming from a book called The Elusive Obvious. The subtitle is The Science of Nonverbal Communication. And we're going to be looking at what is charisma from a nonverbal standpoint. Our first major area is the concept of understanding how our voice pattern affects other people when we communicate with them. So we're going to use two separate concepts. One concept is going to be called credibility. And the other concept is going to be called approachability. Now, people with credibility, they tend to operate from power. They love having a high position over other people. So they have high expectations. People that operate from approachability, they tend to go for morale, relationships, rapport. And what we need to do is we need to balance out when to do these. So for all of those people that are listening now that have high credibility, your goal during the next hour and a half is to understand and appreciate why you want to increase your approachability. All the people that have high approachability have an easy time forming relationships. Then you want to consider how to increase your credibility. Now, here's the key. What you do with your head makes all the difference in the world. I'm going to turn sideways so you can see. If I talk with my head and I keep my head very, very still, my voice comes out flat. But if when I talk, I bob my head, and I hope that Alexander's doing the same thing right now, then my voice tends to roll. This is approachability. Now, in order to understand whether someone is credible or approachable, you first have to hear them speak their languages long enough so you know what is the norm. Example, when I'm in the Mediterranean area and I'm listening to the Italians, the French, the Greeks, I will hear them roll their voice all the time. Everyone talks that way around the Mediterranean area. If I go farther towards the North Pole and I'm in northern Germany, then everyone talks very differently in terms of their voice pattern. So you have to first understand what is the norm culturally for a group of people before you can figure out which member in that group is highly credible or highly approachable. So first the baseline has to be established. But we want to look at the nonverbals of how do you create that flat voice. You create that flat voice by understanding how to do your head, but also how to do your hand. If I talk with my hand down like this, pointed towards each other, towards other people, or if my finger is even pointing this way, this absolutely changes my voice pattern. But if I have my hands up, and this is what you see around the Mediterranean area, you'll be amazed at how just having your palms up changes your whole voice pattern. Amazingly so. So there's two nonverbals that we want to pay attention to in terms of how to control how you come across in terms of being credible and approachable. Now, we have a little reminder here that will help you. And this is a painter's palette. It has to do with all the colors that you could paint with. And so nonverbals, much like the colors when you paint, can be broken in different sections. The V, uh, it stands for what you do with your eyes, visual. The A stands for your auditory, what you do with your voice pattern. The K stands for the kinesthetic, what you do with your body and locations. And then lastly, the fourth area of nonverbals is breathing. So just like you can paint any color if you have the four basic color groups, so true in terms of communication. Nonverbals make up the hidden messages of any kind of communication. So to summarize the two things we've suggested so far, if you are naturally credible and you want to become more charismatic, then try to move your head a little bit more and have your hands up when you talk. You need to know when to do it, and you'll come across as being more a balance of both. If you already have lots of approachability, oh, I always move my head like this, I tend to wiggle when I move, then in order to increase your charisma, then you have to make sure that you hold your head still and have your palm down as you talk to other people. Now, we have segments of our culture that is very credible. The military in general tend to either attract highly credible people or foster them to become more credible. This happens to be some in the United States, but I would suggest in any country. When the military appears, they tend to talk and keep their head still at all times. They tend to have their hand down when they talk. The third thing that you see in this picture that is helpful to consider, and that is this. If you want to be extremely credible, besides having your hand out and your head still, try to drop your chin down so that your pupils are high in your eye socket, and you come across as much more serious. Certain actors in films use that to come across as I'm powerful, I'm strong, I'm congruent. So when you see people on television, pictures in newspapers, or when you watch them on television or live, watch what they do with their head, with their hand, their chin, and then one more thing about the chin that we want to look at. So we're going to go back one slide. And the third line down, where it says intonations, if you are talking, and at the end of whatever you say, you take your chin and drop it down as you come to the end of a phrase or a sentence, it will sound more credible. If, on the other hand, you want to increase your approachability, then when you come to the end of whatever you were saying, just make sure that you move your chin up. As your chin comes up, your voice pattern comes up. So we know that visually, if we show our pupils high in our eye socket, we come across as highly credible. We know that our voice pattern, if it is flat, tends to come across as highly credible. And then kinesthetically, it is keeping our head still, our palm out, and then just dropping whatever we're saying at the end of whatever the words are that comes out. It's a commanding kind of voice. Likewise, if we want to understand the mechanics of approachability, what we do is we make sure that we take our head and almost come off the side. If you look almost out of the side of your head, you come across as a little more approachable. And also, if we make sure that we bob our head and we have our palm up, all of these will tend to increase our voice pattern and make sure your chin comes up at the end of whatever you say, and you'll come across as more approachable. Now think of someone you know that is highly credible. We've already talked about certain segments of our society, such as the military and sports, tend to be very high degree of people that are credible. I once worked for a corporation, and they had 7 stories in a building. And as I would get off the elevator on one of the lower levels of the building, everyone had a rather friendly, approachable voice. But as I got up towards the top, last 2 floors of the 7-story building, as I got off the elevator, everyone greeted me with a hand that was very frozen, very definite. And so literally inside of organizations, at the very top of those organizations, that's where you're going to find the highly credible people. At the bottom of those same organizations are where the highly approachable people are. So if you want to get promoted and become more powerful, have a more authoritative role in the organizational structure, increase your credibility. But if you're already up there and you're highly credible, then learn how to be more approachable. Why is that important? When I talk in a credible fashion, I'm indicating that what I'm saying, the words that are coming out of my mouth, are not open to negotiation. They have to be followed this way. However, if I want to have a dialogue with people, if I want their input, if I want to brainstorm with them, look at all kinds of possibilities, then I have to make sure that I have an approachable kind of voice. For example, I'm going to stand up so you can see what the body looks like, because the body supports the idea of credibility and approachability. So I'm standing here with you now. And if I stand up very straight, turning sideways so you can see, then I come across as much more credible. If, however, I lean in any way, I come across as more approachable. So your body position, not just your voice, your hands, where your pupils are in your eye socket, make a huge difference in terms of how you come across. So if you want to be relaxed, then just have more weight on one leg than the other. I'm going to change the camera so you can see even better. If my legs have the weight on both of them equally, my voice will come out flatter, and I look like I'm highly credible. But if I stand with one leg, with the weight on one leg more than the other, I come across as much more approachable. You can actually see the change in terms of how people communicate based on what they do with their body. So if I'm seated or standing, I need to know how my body conveys credibility or approachability. So then the biggest question you have, your number one question is, you have to ask, am I sending information? If so, then I want to use credibility. But if I want to seek information, if I want to have a dialogue, a conversation, then I have to use approachability. Have you ever seen a boss or a professor or a teacher that starts a meeting like this? Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. What we're going to cover today is some very nice things. Their head goes off to the side, their voice rolls, and they have their palms up. This person is coming across as very friendly, very helpful. And of course, I am exaggerating, but you do know people that are like this. This person here may get a lot of dialogue going, but they don't come across as intelligent. Whereas someone who knows how to come across as highly credible, they will have all the ability in the world to seem authoritative. but that doesn't mean that anyone will share ideas. Example, if a boss talks to a subordinate in the following manner, hey, tell me what your idea is. Do you think this is going to work? Well, then the subordinate is encouraged to share because of the nonverbals of the boss. But if the boss goes like this, tell me what you think. I want your ideas. The other person is not encouraged to talk. So charisma, the art of relationship, is the ability to know how to be credible, how to be approachable, and when to do both. Now, if we go to another slide, this slide is a summary of what we just did. It is slide number 6. At the same time, it is important to understand that there is a direct correlation, at least in the Western world, and you would know better than I would if this applies to the Russian world in terms of your gender. So in the Western world, females are encouraged to stand with the weight on one leg more than the other. They tend to stand with the foot out like this. If the female is dressed up in high heels, she will tend to be off to the side even more. So the outfits that you wear tend to influence how you come across. Probably the most famous line we have in terms of movies, in terms of credibility, is the famous James Bond movies, where every time he talks and introduces himself, his head is very still and he drops his chin down as he says his name. Bond. My name is James Bond. So while he's very credible, and this chart indicates on number 6 that he's very masculine. So when you think of people that are very feminine, they will tend to have the approachability. Now, this is not very fair. This is not a real representation of how masculine or feminine someone is. But the first impressions we have of people absolutely conveys whether they're very masculine or very feminine. So when men are very masculine because of their body size, or they're physically very strong, or they've lifted weights and they look very solid, they already have their high credibility. So then what I try to do is I try to get them to be more approachable. Because when you have both, then you have charisma. Charisma is a balance between being credible and being approachable. Now, it's very unfair that while we try to take masculine males and make them more approachable to be more charismatic, with females, if you try to make them too credible, they sometimes lose the ability to be promoted inside of organizations. So we're just going to read these lines on this chart and see if you can think of yourself and other people and how to accurately interpret their behaviors. If someone's head is very still, then that person will tend to come across as more credible, even when they're listening. If they nod their head when they're listening, they tend to come across as very approachable. So even when you're listening, if you tilt your head, if you have just any kind of a bob to your head, that's going to increase your approachability. Another person that watches you do this will tend to talk more and share more with you because of how you're coming across. If you don't want people to talk with you, then all you have to do is to make sure that you keep your head still when you're listening, and it'll be a much shorter conversation. Now, in addition to what you do with your head, if you are silent when you listen, then you come across as highly credible. If, however, you make what's called encouraging sounds, such as, that will come across as highly approachable. So there's a balance between when you want to be credible and when you want to be approachable. And it also comes across as in terms of both when you're talking and when you're listening. So whatever you are doing, be aware of how other people see you. What you are doing with your body, of course, is important also. If you sit with your back straight, and especially farther away from the person, you are indicating you're highly credible. If you are someone who leans forward, then you are indicating you're highly approachable. So I'm going to change the camera angle here. So if I want someone to share with me, a lot of times I lean forward. I tilt my head just a little bit. And what I do is I make sure that the person feels welcome, encouraged by everything we're doing. It's a friendly, safe atmosphere. Now, if you want, it is dangerous in many of our cultures to touch. Only if it's appropriate to touch would you want to touch. But if you did touch and it is appropriate, you would increase your approachability. Now, there is a concept in terms of pressure. In a conversation, if you put the burden on the other person, such as looking something like this. So tell me, what can you do for me? How can you help me? So this is highly credible. The burden is on the other person. Whereas if you are highly cooperative, if you assist the person, how can I help us? You're going to find that that's highly approachable. So this chart is something you're going to find that is very helpful to have. And it is talking about the connection between our genders as well as our credibility and approachability. One last thing in this chart that we want to look at, and that's at the bottom, and that is when you're with someone who's highly credible, they have a tendency to focus on themselves. And someone who focuses on the team, who is highly cooperative, they tend to be more team-oriented. They will make sure that the group is successful, not just themselves. So as we get ready to finish this chart, please think of someone who you know is highly credible? Who do you know that does lots of activities that you would call highly credible? Then think of someone who's highly approachable. The person who is able to be both credible and approachable, they have more choices, more options, and they have a greater capacity to be charismatic. How you form relationships with these two different groups of people are very, very different. When you're around someone who is highly credible, if you tend to be more approachable than them, and you're talking to that person, so thank you for letting me have this meeting with you. I know your schedule is very busy, so thank you for letting me have some time with you. If the other person is not responding in kind, but is indicating that they're very authoritative, there's a mismatch between both parties. So then what will happen is the person who's highly approachable, they will tend to even do it more. They will lean forward more, they will bob their head more, they'll sound even more friendly. And a lot of times that does not work. So make sure you're flexible in terms of your communication. Alexander, I've lost hearing your voice. If someone can indicate that we're still translating, that would be helpful. I will pause for a second. I see a signal here saying just a second. I will wait. Let me know when to start again, please. Here we go. So we want to continue with our hour and a half talking about charisma. And to summarize, we've used nonverbals to describe how to be more credible and how to be more approachable. An example of where charisma comes into play is slide number 7. Slide number 7 talks about the 4 phases of the decision-making process. Now try to think of a situation that you've been in the last couple weeks, or a decision that is going to be made the next couple weeks. We're still trying to get in the Russian room the 4 phases of a decision-making process up. If it doesn't work, they may want to go to slide number 8 if they cannot put number 7 up. We're still looking for slide number 7 or slide number 8. Alexander, we're going to continue. There are 4 phases of the decision-making process. There's the gathering phase. There's the evaluating phase. And then there's the decision-making phase. The last one is implementing whatever the decision is. For today, we're only going to cover the first 3. The gathering, the evaluating, and the deciding. Those are the 3 that we're interested in. Now, how does the decision-making process tie together with being credible and approachable, and how does it tie together with how to increase your charisma? Well, here's what we find is true. When we're in the gathering phase of any kind of a process, the members that are naturally approachable, that tend to bob their head, they listen with encouraging sounds, they roll their hands almost from their body to the other people or from the other people to themselves. Those people tend to increase the amount of material that is gathered. So you have lots and lots of information to come together because of the approachability of members that are there. So if you are naturally approachable, and when you're in a decision-making process, you are highly valued. People really admire you because of how much information we can gather. The problem is when we move out of the first phase and we go into the second phase, those people that are still approachable from the gathering phase, they are not highly valued when we get to the evaluating. So when we evaluate, that's when we go more credible, and when we want to actually figure out which weight should be given to the different items that we brainstorm. Those people that can absolutely be definitive, authoritative, they come across as much more credible. So we have first the gathering, then we have the evaluating, and then the third one is going to be deciding. We should do this. And people that can talk with their palm down and point towards people, it's better to point with all fingers than it is to point with just one finger. You'll find that those people tend to have more influence in terms of what's going on. Now, here's what you'll find. If you're naturally approachable, then you'll do well during the first phase. If you're naturally credible, you'll do well during the second and third phase. The problem is neither of those people are charismatic because they only are valued during segments of the evaluation process. So here's the secret. If you want to be charismatic, then make sure you are approachable when we are gathering, and then shift to being more credible when we're doing evaluating and deciding. That's going to be much more effective in terms of influencing people and the decision that we actually do. Now, think of people that you know. When you are in the gathering phase, do you appreciate them being present? When you're in the evaluating and deciding phase, do you tend to have a higher value for those people that are highly credible? If you want to be charismatic, know when to be approachable and when to be credible. The ability to switch between both highly approachable and highly credible, that's what will allow you to be charismatic. Now, we've been looking at the decision-making process from an individual side. In slide number 8, we have the idea of looking at an entire group or an organization. If the people that are gathered are highly credible, then what they will do is they will tend to skip the gathering phase and they immediately go to the evaluating or deciding phase. The problem is they don't take a long time to make a decision. If you're a subordinate and you're giving information to a boss, and that boss is highly credible, they don't listen well. If we go back to the story we told earlier about the 7 floors of a big office building, all of the floors are owned by the same corporation. The tendency is the people on the top floor, they don't listen as well, and therefore they're not as charismatic. The people on the bottom, they listen well, but they're afraid to make decisions. So neither people at the top or people at the bottom are necessarily charismatic. We've got to figure out how to get more people charismatic. And in particular, how charismatic do you want to be? If you're just drawn to power, position, authority, you will probably get promoted. You'll probably be comfortable making decisions, but you may not gather all the information you need. If you are naturally approachable, you may do very, very well with the idea of having a high rapport, relationships with people, and at the same time, you may not get promoted. So with highly credible groups, they skip the gathering phase, and they go directly into evaluating and deciding. Our next slide talks about groups that are highly approachable. Highly approachable people, they tend to do very well in terms of the gathering, but they're afraid to make a decision. They don't want to offend anyone. Now, just like we said, that the military and sports have a lot of people that are highly credible. If you want to see a lot of people that are highly approachable, just join any kind of charity or a church because they tend to be more approachable. Now, what do you do when you're a subordinate and you're with someone who's highly credible and they're not listening to the information that you have that is valuable? It's really dangerous to make a statement towards a highly credible person like, I think you're wrong. You should listen to me more. That is not effective. So then the question is, well, what do you do? Instead of making statements with highly credible people, if you can ask them a question instead. Now, normally people that are highly credible, their value set is different than people that are highly approachable. For the highly credible people, they're very interested usually in such things as prestige, money, power, memory, people that will look to them and they have high. Here we go. So we want to continue with our hour and a half talking about charisma. And to summarize, we've used nonverbals to describe how to be more credible and how to be more approachable. An example of where charisma comes into play is slide number 7. Slide number 7 talks about the 4 phases of the decision-making process. Now try to think of a situation that you've been in the last couple weeks or a decision that is going to be made the next couple weeks. We're still trying to get in the Russian room the 4 phases of a decision-making process up. If it doesn't work, they may want to go to slide number 8 if they cannot put number 7 up. We're still looking for slide number 7 or slide number 8. Alexander, we're going to continue. There are 4 phases of the decision-making process. There's the gathering phase. There's the evaluating phase. And then there's the decision-making phase. The last one is implementing whatever the decision is. For today, we're only going to cover the first 3. The gathering, the evaluating, and the deciding. Those are the 3 that we're interested in. Now, how does the decision-making process tie together with being credible and approachable, and how does it tie together with how to increase your charisma? Well, here's what we find is true. When we're in the gathering phase of any kind of a process, the members that are naturally approachable, that tend to bob their head, they listen with encouraging sounds, they roll their hands almost from their body to the other people or from the other people to themselves. Those people tend to increase the amount of material that is gathered. So you have lots and lots of information to come together because of the approachability of members that are there. So if you are naturally approachable, and when you're in a decision-making process, you are highly valued. People really admire you because of how much information we can gather. The problem is when we move out of the first phase and we go into the second phase, those people that are still approachable from the gathering phase, they are not highly valued when we get to the evaluating. So when we evaluate, that's when we go more credible, and when we want to actually figure out which weight should be given to the different items that we brainstorm, those people that can absolutely be definitive, authoritative, they come across as much more credible. So we have first the gathering, then we have the evaluating, and then the third one is going to be deciding. We should do this. And people that can talk with their palm down and point towards people, it's better to point with all fingers than it is to point with just one finger. You'll find that those people tend to have more influence in terms of what's going on. Now, here's what you'll find. If you're naturally approachable, then you'll do well during the first phase. If you're naturally credible, you'll do well during the second and third phase. The problem is neither of those people are charismatic because they only are valued during segments of the evaluation process. So here's the secret. If you want to be charismatic, then make sure you are approachable when we are gathering, and then shift to being more credible when we're doing evaluating and deciding. That's going to be much more effective in terms of influencing people and the decision that we actually do. Now, think of people that you know. When you are in the gathering phase, do you appreciate them being present? When you're in the evaluating and deciding phase, do you tend to have a higher value for those people that are highly credible? If you want to be charismatic, know when to be approachable and when to be credible. The ability to switch between both highly approachable and highly credible, that's what will allow you to be charismatic. Now, we've been looking at the decision-making process from an individual side. In slide number 8, we have the idea of looking at an entire group or an organization. If the people that are gathered are highly credible, then what they will do is they will tend to skip the gathering phase and they immediately go to the evaluating or deciding phase. The problem is they don't take a long time to make a decision. If you're a subordinate and you're giving information to a boss, and that boss is highly credible, they don't listen well. If we go back to the story we told earlier about the 7 floors of a big office building, all of the floors are owned by the same corporation. The tendency is the people on the top floor, they don't listen as well, and therefore they're not as charismatic. The people on the bottom, they listen well, but they're afraid to make decisions. So neither people at the top or people at the bottom are necessarily charismatic. We've got to figure out how to get more people charismatic. And in particular, how charismatic do you want to be? If you're just drawn to power, position, authority, you will probably get promoted. You'll probably be comfortable making decisions, but you may not gather all the information you need. If you are naturally approachable, you may do very, very well with the idea of having high rapport, relationships with people, and at the same time, you may not get promoted. So with highly credible groups, they skip the gathering phase and they go directly into evaluating and deciding. Our next slide talks about groups that are highly approachable. Highly approachable people, they tend to do very well in terms of the gathering, but they're afraid to make a decision. They don't want to offend anyone. Now, just like we said, that the military and sports have a lot of people that are highly credible. If you want to see a lot of people that are highly approachable, just join any kind of charity or a church because they tend to be more approachable. Now, what do you do when you're a subordinate and you're with someone who's highly credible and they're not listening to the information that you have that is valuable? It's really dangerous to make a statement towards a highly credible person like, I think you're wrong. You should listen to me more. That is not effective. So then the question is, well, what do you do? Instead of making statements with highly credible people, if you can ask them a question instead. Now, normally people that are highly credible, their value set is different than people that are highly approachable. For the highly credible people, they're very interested usually in such things as prestige, money, power, memory, people that will look to them and they have high status. So with them, if the person is not listening, one of the things you can ask them is this: is the decision you're about to make really important to you? And would you like it to last? If so, do you have all the information you need, not just to make the decision, but to make sure that the decision will be carried out by many different levels of our organization? The person hearing that question question tends to listen more and go, yeah, okay, where should I gather more information? So it's helpful if you can make sure that when you're working with someone who's above you, ask them questions when they're not gathering. Now, if you want, if you're working with someone that's highly approachable above you, which is not normally what happens, but it's a boss that is always listening to people, they will tend not to want to make the decision. So what happens then is, and you're the subordinate and you're trying to figure out how to get this boss to make decisions. Again, if it's a superior, it's better for you to ask them a question than to make a statement. So the question you want to ask an approachable superior is the question of, if you don't make a decision, that is a decision also, and people will be affected. Just to repeat it. If you don't make a decision, that is a decision also, and people will be affected. So to be charismatic, you can be charismatic on any level of an organization. But you have to make sure you practice your sets of skills that make sense. Now, if you look at slide number 10, on slide number 10, we have what's called the 3 levels of any kind of negotiation. Because people that are charismatic are good negotiators. The highest level of any kind of conflict is if you have relationships from the past, or you're going to have relationships in the future. The lowest level of any kind of a decision-making process are the issues. And in between are the motivation, the needs, the concerns that are below the surface. Highly credible people only focus on the issues. So we're going to underline that. They're thinking of bottom line. How much will it cost? What is the profit involved? How many resources will be taken up by doing this? So credible people have to be taught, and that's what this arrow up is here. They have to be taught how to pay attention to relationships. And people that are highly approachable, they're very, very good at relationships. They pay attention to the people involved. And they have to be taught how to pay more attention to the issues. So when you are working with people, try to figure out, are they more credibly oriented and they're paying attention to issues? Or are they more approachable oriented and they're paying attention to relationships? Teach them to pay attention to all 3 levels. And then you'll make them more charismatic. Now think of yourself. And sometimes we are different at home than we are at work. So just for a second, at work, do you tend to be more approachable? Or do you tend to be more credible? At home, do you tend to be more credible? Or do you tend to be more approachable? Remember, your positions make a huge difference in terms of how you come across. Most of our listeners are very familiar with flying on a plane. So let's look at the idea of credibility and approachability in terms of when you fly on an aircraft. When you get on the plane, at some point, you'll find that the pilot will come on and welcome you. So I'm going to pretend I'm a pilot. This is your captain speaking. We're going to be flying to St. Petersburg. The flight will take about an hour and a half. Please relax, be comfortable, and if there's anything we can do to help you, don't hesitate to ask us. So the pilot is paying attention to the issues. How to fly the plane. So while verbally the pilot said, is there anything we can do to help you? The pilot's nonverbals indicate, don't bother me, I'm flying the plane. Now, after the pilot talks, then oftentimes the flight attendants will come on. When the flight attendants come on, they bob their head, turning sideways so you can see. Hi, this is your flight attendants. We'll be coming up and down the aisle with our beverage cart. If there's anything we can do for you today, don't hesitate to ask us. So again, we believe that in any kind of organizational structure, the higher up you are, such as the pilot on the plane, the more you're credible and you pay attention to how to get things done. The lower the levels of any organization, the more the people pay attention to relationships. How do others feel? Are they comfortable? Are they safe? Is there anything we can do to help you? Neither one of them are very charismatic. It's when you blend those together. But at the same time, if you have a higher position and you try to go to approachability and it's inappropriate, it won't work. Example, here's a pilot on a plane, and this is cartoonish. This is comedy. Hey, this is your captain speaking. We got a lot of fuel and we can't land in St. Petersburg. It's too foggy. So use your call button right above your seat and press it. And we're going to vote, hey, do we want to go over to the Baltic? Do we want to go to Siberia? Do we want to go down by Turkey, Bulgaria, before we get over to St. Petersburg? We're going to be in the air for 3 hours. We got enough fuel. The fog's not going to clear. So let's vote. Let's vote. If you're a passenger, you want to get off that plane. You do not expect the pilot to be joking. You want the pilot to be serious. At the same time, we expect the flight attendants to be very friendly. What if we, in this comedy, switch roles and have the flight attendants be very, very credible? This is your flight attendants. We're going to be moving up and down the aisle with a cart. Keep your elbows out of the way. Keep your toes out of the aisle. We want to make sure that we do our beverage service in a timely manner. You're the passenger on this plane. And you go, looks like the flight attendants are in a bad mood. We convey credibility and approachability all the time. The question is, do you know how to do both? And do you know when to do which? So if we go to our next slide, slide number 11, we have a summary of many of the ideas that we've covered so far. We're coming up on 1 hour of being with each other. We have a half hour to go, and we want to just summarize what we've covered so far. The purpose of being highly credible is to make sure that you know how to send information. The purpose of being highly approachable is how to seek information. There is a correlation between being highly credible and being males, masculine. When you want to be highly approachable, there's a direct correlation that is connected with being more feminine. Even giving compliments is a skill that you have to consider. Example, I can give a compliment from my position, or I can give a compliment from my person. Example, if I'm a boss, the report that you've worked on is very good. I thank you. My voice and my nonverbals communicate. It is my position that is complimenting you. If I want to do a personal compliment, if I bob my head, have my palm up, and I just say anything like, you've worked hard on this report. I want to thank you for doing this report. Now the position is giving the compliment. Sorry, now the person is giving the compliment, not the position. Now this is where charisma comes into relationships. When someone is new to a job, if you give the compliment from your position, this report is good. That motivates the person. But if you've worked with a person for a long time, then oftentimes positional compliments will not work. What they then want is they want more a personal compliment. Hey, you've worked with me for 5 years now. But this report is even better than your other reports. Thank you. That's charisma. It's the ability to have a whole range of behaviors. Again, we are summarizing what we know about the idea of credibility and approachability. So the higher positions tend to be much more credibly oriented. If you want, you can look at whole organizations. If most organizations give compliments that are positional, then the organization is what's called hierarchical. If they give their compliments more from their person, then it's more of a level organization. You can also look at whether the organization focuses on making decisions or if they make a lot of gathering. Any organization that likes to have a lot of meetings tend to be an organization that is more approachable. Let's look at one other factor. It's called management style. Think about when you were being raised by your mom and your dad. When you were you managed quickly by one parent, and was the other parent slower to manage you? The parent that managed quickly, that parent is the more of the credible one. And the one that managed slowly was more the approachable one. The one that manages quickly tends to have higher expectations, and the one that manages slowly tends to be more relationship oriented. And so this is a good summary of what we've covered. We want to separate out our intentions from our behaviors. Just because I may have the right intention inside, such as high expectations or wanting a high relationship, that's not the same as being effective. So if we want to look at our behaviors and how other people are responding to us, the best way to understand that is to pay attention to our nonverbals. Where's your head? Where's your chin? Is your body straight? Is the weight on both legs, or is there more weight on one leg than the other? You want to be both credible and approachable. Now, the next slide, number 12, is also a summary of what we've talked about. And it talks a little bit more about your body and especially how you communicate. I'm going to stand up so you can see. If you want to come across as highly intelligent, whether you're credible or approachable, then the way to do that is make sure when you talk with your hands. And when you pause, wherever your hand is, leave it still. Whether the palms are down or whether the palms are up. Don't move them during the pause, and you hold people's attention. But if during the pause, you drop your hands, especially if you swing them, you don't come across as intelligent. So if you want to be charismatic, make sure you know how to practice in front of a mirror. Now, you can have a small mirror, like this here, and you can watch your head. You'll see if your head is still. But if you want to get very good, you have to get a bigger mirror so you can see your whole torso from at least the waist up. And see if you can talk and keep your hands still during the pause. The pause and the hand still makes other people see you as more intelligent. When you're more intelligent, you're going to find that people will respect you more. You can influence them more. So today we're trying to summarize that we want to understand ourselves and other people more. Whatever we do is fine. but we have to be aware of how other people interpret us. We especially have focused on increasing your leadership and increasing your ability to handle difficult situations. We're just about the end of our program, and we want to extend our learning in a variety of different ways. Number one, we recommend highly watch yourself in front of a mirror and you'll see what your head is doing. Then watch yourself at a larger so that you can see your whole torso and make sure you are pausing when you are talking. Pay attention to your head, your hand, your eyes, your voice, your body, and breathing. Those are the 4 categories of how you make up all the nonverbals that we have. Now, one of the most charismatic people that I have ever known of is a fellow by the name of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is charismatic for a number of reasons. Number one is, if you think about what he did in his life, he was imprisoned, but he wasn't bitter. He was confined, but he always had freedom and latitude. And when he came out of prison, he was not angry at the people that put him in prison. He was charismatic. The poem that you see on your screen, Alexander's going to read in just a minute. It is not written by him, but is said to be one of his favorite poems. We've shortened it so that it's easier for you to remember. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Playing small doesn't serve the world. Playing small so that other people are comfortable around us is inappropriate. And as we let our own light shine through, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. The purpose of being charismatic is not so that I am charismatic and others are not. It's so that we are all charismatic. As we liberate ourselves from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. Now, currently in the sports world, Russia has a tremendous amount of charismatic people. They're called female tennis players. Think about it. These are people that are tremendous athletes, and they're very credible, determined. They have absolute competition, but at the same time, they're very feminine. So the Russian Federation, with all the representatives, especially in the female tennis world, have example after example of people that are very, very charismatic. We want to end on some other things. Excuse me while I set this up. This is a statue that I absolutely love. This is a woman, and she is chiseling herself out of the earth. And what you'll find is, although we've spent almost an hour and a half with each other, and we've covered lots of nonverbals, you still have to practice. It's not enough for you to know in the area of nonverbals. We have to have the ability to chisel out, to create the person we want to become. One of my other heroes is Mahatma Gandhi, who said, we want to become the people that we want the earth to be. So find at least 2 other people in your world that have the same level of commitment to excellence. Make sure that you support each other, create an atmosphere where you can support each other's growth. And then one last major idea. I was taking a vacation with my wife. We were up by Canada, and on a very small island, we walked out into the forest. When we walked out into the forest, I saw something that absolutely amazed me. This is an actual photograph of a very large structure. It's probably at least 6 meters high. And if you'll notice it, it's made out of marble. But you'll see that one of the columns is not finished. The person who built this was very wealthy. He was a billionaire. But he made sure that one of the columns was not finished. And then he had a sign that he carved out. And it basically said, your work is never done. Make sure you take time for your family. I was so moved by this that I made sure that I have someone make me the very same model. So this is a replica of this beautiful out in the forest marble structure. But you'll see that one of the columns is not finished. And so I would encourage you. Your work is never done. But make sure you find time for family, and I would add to that professional development. We have to make sure that we carve out for ourselves the future that we want. I want to thank Frank for letting me present and share my ideas with you today. My name is Michael Grinder. I'm the brother of John Grinder, the co-founder of Neurolinguistic Programming. I try to add the nonverbals to the fine, deep structure work that NLP is. You still have to practice them. Make sure you get a mirror. Make sure that you understand how, not only how you see yourself, but how do others see me? If you want to be very brave, please consider taping yourself from the waist up, whether you're standing or seated. Then play back that video footage and make sure that you see it at least 5 times The first couple times you see it, you're going to see yourself. But if you're really practicing, in time, you'll start seeing the behaviors that you do, not just you, the person, but your behaviors. And you'll get better and better at analyzing not who I am, but who that person on the footage is. The first 2 times that you see yourself, you'll be vain. You'll look at your outfit, how you look, whether you're aging, whether you need to go to the gym and work out more. But as you watch it all the way up to 5 times, you'll start seeing the person that other people see. It's an example, the first time you hear yourself tape recorded, your voice is going to sound different to you, but it's not different to other people. That's how you actually sound. Our feedback about ourselves is skewed. It's not accurate. I hear my voice in terms of my ears because it resonates through the structure of my skull. But when it's recorded by a machine and I play back and listen to myself, I go, that's not me. Actually, it is. We have to get outside of ourselves, get through the vanity for us to start understanding how we come across. And that is the start of being able to be charismatic. If you're highly, highly approachable, then try to increase your ability to be credible. If you're highly credible, try to increase your approachability. You can't have high credibility without having high relationships. Why? If you're only highly credible, you'll wear people out. They get burnt out. They have to go work for someone else. If you're highly approachable, people may love working there, but they're not getting enough done. You've got to have both high relationship and high expectations to be charismatic. That's how you come together and you become more charismatic. This is Michael Grinder. I thank Frank for letting me do this. I thank Alexander for translating. Make sure 5 to 10 minutes a week minimum of making sure you pay attention to how other people see you, not how you see yourself. Frank and I are going to be presenting at the end of May, the 17th through the 19th in Moscow. What you've heard today are like the hors d'oeuvres of a good meal. If you want the full meal, see you on the 17th, 18th, and 19th of May in Moscow. Thank you and goodbye. Come in, 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 come in. I'm still on, I think. I have to get. No, stay here, stay here. Very different. One of the things that was a very nice. Oops. Please wait for a minute. They're promoting. One of the. We had 2 rooms. so I could actually see the Russian room. They took all the PowerPoints, and you'd be proud of me. I made up my own PowerPoint set from the one we did with Mike and Hope, and was able to put it up. So I only showed them that. I know. I was able to figure out they had a little bit different on this here. It doesn't seem like I have the ability. Please switch off your mic.